I have again the privilege of introducing a friend, someone that I've known for almost a decade now, and I look forward to allowing him to share some of the things that he's been working on. Anirban not only holds his PhD, but he's got a lot of street creds. A serial entrepreneur that's created multiple products to acquisition, but never stopping being curious to help solve bigger, more cosmic issues. In from freshly relocated Austin, Texas, please welcome Anirban.
Can everybody hear me well? Is it good? Yes. Perfect. So once we start the presentation, here's what we'll do. The person who comes in next to the door, I'll ask them their name, and whenever they say whatever it is, we'll say, "You volunteered to bring us all donuts," and then we'll clap together. Let's see how that goes. But thank you very much for having me here. We had great presentations, and I have to warn people, this is going to be super technical. So you might want to get a nice glass of water, a nice Coke or something. So just fair warning, there's going to be a lot of technical stuff over here. I'm going to talk about the data supply chain. I'll give you some context about why this problem seems to be important. Why is it interesting? What are companies doing about it? This is not going to be about Riscosity. This is the only place that you'll see the logo for the company, but except that it's going to be purely about the problem. I'll kick this off by showing you all a very interesting diagram. This is a very scientifically curated architectural diagram that represents nearly 95% of all software development in the Fortune 5000s. This particular diagram that you're going to see in a second, this has been peer tested, peer reviewed, and anybody who has spent anywhere from 5 to 20 years in software development will agree that what you're about to see is the ground reality. And it's unbelievable that one single diagram can encompass the architectural complexity of most enterprise software. It sounds unbelievable, but you'll see it in a second. And again, this is peer reviewed. It's not just made up. It's a serious thing. This is it. This is the reality. It's not that we want it to be like this, but it is the reality. Why? Because if I look at my life, I don't do everything by myself. I didn't make the wool for this sweater. I bought it from somewhere. I didn't bake my own bread. I bought it from somewhere. Right? So we are outsourcing, in a sense, a lot of the things that we need for our daily lives. If that is the way humanity goes, we do the same thing in enterprises. We're not going to build our own two-factor authentication system. We're not going to build our own data lake system. We're not going to build our own 10 different services, because every single enterprise company has to focus on what is what makes it money. That's the reality. It's a business, it's a for-profit business. You got to make money. You're not going to be building 20 different services. There are exceptions to that, where companies with very deep pockets and big technical teams like Netflix and Uber, they will build their own data lake kind of thing on the side. Not everybody can do that, which is fine. I mean, if you want to go build a custom solution for yourself, go build a custom solution for yourself. The reality is you won't be able to sustain it. So this is what it looks like. Why is this not sustainable? Why is it that if your code base for your company, your product looks like this, why is it not sustainable? In fact, if it looks like spaghetti or even BS to some extent, why is it not sustainable? Somebody much more wiser than me used a story to explain this, and I'm going to borrow it from them. It's not mine, it's not original. So one day there was a tree in a field, and on this tree there was a beautiful parrot that was sitting on a branch. And the parrot was really sad that it couldn't really fly well. And there was a bull grazing around in the field and came by to the tree and looked at the beautiful parrot. And the bull asked the parrot, "Hey, why are you sad? What's going on?" The parrot said, I don't have the energy to fly. If I just had the energy to fly, I would see many things and all that stuff. And the bull said, "Well, I have a potential solution for you, but you'll have to do exactly what I say." The parrot said, "All right, what do I have to do?" The bull said, "Well, I've kind of taken a dump over there. You'll have to eat a little bit of that." And the parrot said, "What? Come again? You want me to what?" And the bull repeated himself, and he said, "No, you're going to have to do that. If you want to fly, you want energy, you'll have to go eat that." The parrot said, "Oh man, this is crazy." And the bull said, "No, try it. You got to try it once, and you'll see the results." The parrot said, "Oh, fine, I'll do this thing." Went and pecked at it, and lo and behold, the next day, the parrot did feel a change in its energy level and could flap its wings. The bull came by the next day. "Hey, how you feeling?" "Better." "Well, let's do it again." The parrot did it again. And again, the next day, the parrot was stronger, could fly a little bit more. The third day, the fourth day, the parrot felt really strong, and he could fly to the top of the tree. And when he went to the top of the tree, he felt, "Wow, I've never seen this view before. It's so beautiful. I can see the tops of the trees, and all this is great and beautiful." And as the parrot was admiring the view, a big eagle came by with its talons open and snatched the parrot, and the parrot was no more. So what is the moral of the story? Anybody can say that gets a $25 Amazon gift card. Want to take a shot at it? What's the moral of the story? Okay, here it goes. Bullshit can get you to the top of the tree, but it can't keep you there. So, you might be able to get along, get customers, grow your company. And I have to face the music sometime. When we talk about software development, what do we mean when we look at software? What are the various big blocks of software that we talk about? Backend, frontend, APIs, all these nice terms. What does it actually do? Backend is essentially the state where you are processing information, storing information, not directly visible to your end user. Front end is whatever little software that you have that is interacting with the user. And what are the APIs? A little bit of backstory. I'll give away my age over here. Has anybody heard the word Corba? C-O-R-B-A? Corba? Or SOAP? S-O-A-P? SOAP? These are the precursors of what we call APIs today. What does an API actually do? It's a term for essentially moving computing context and data from point A to point B. That's it. There's no magic word. It's just like you put stuff in a truck, you move it from point A to point B. Nothing amazing about it. So this problem of moving computing context and data from point A to point B has been there for the last 35, 40 years. It's not new. We've had many different approaches to solve the problem. The most recent and the popular one is API. Why? The why is because it's easier. As time has progressed for developers, it has become easier to use APIs to move computing context and data from point A to point B. Because more packages are available, it's easier, more documentation is there, it's at HTTP layer 7 and all that, but we'll go into those as we need. The thing is, APIs have exploded. Sometimes people don't realize, especially sometimes in the banking industry, smaller banks, let's say 30 billion or less in terms of total assets, we don't use APIs. Do you use Fiserv? Do you use FIS? Do you use any one of these services, MasterCard, Visa? How do you think your data is getting from you to these services? And this is an image directly from FIS's own documentation, nothing to do with me. Look at the number of APIs they have to pass data and context in between FIS services as well as between customers and FIS themselves. The point being, APIs are being adopted at a rapid rate by all types of companies. Sometimes it's visible, sometimes it's not visible, but they are there under the hood, one way or the other, moving computing context and data from point A to point B. Now, here's a quick question. Take a random guess at in a standard enterprise organization, standard code base, not talking about Google, Netflix, any one of those like software heavy organizations, mid-tier enterprise organizations, how many third-party APIs on average do you think might be in the code base? Let's take a general Fortune 5000 company. Take a wild guess. How many APIs would you see?
640.
Good number. Anybody else? Take a guess. Well,
641. 639.
See, smart people.
Put me in a box.
Optimize just a little bit below an hour. But the $25 gift card was for something else. This is the average number. In 2021, there are close to 1,200 API calls in a standard enterprise code base. And we're not talking about Google. We're not talking about Netflix. We're not talking about any of the software heavy big boys or girls. So when this type of explosion is happening under the hood, we have to ask, like, where is the concern? What's the problem? If we have APIs, what's the issue? The issue is actually succinctly covered in these three questions. It's very easy to ask these questions, but very difficult to solve for them. Why? Let's look at each one of these questions. Where is your data going? Why is that important? Because for most enterprise companies today, when you have a third-party partner, if you have some semblance of a legal process, you have to sign these reams of documentation. Whatever OpenGR, CDIS, that whatever tool you have, you're stuffing all the documentation in there. What does this documentation contain? Hey, Mr. Vendor, give me your SOC 2. Hey, Mr. Vendor, give me your pen testing. Hey, Mr. Vendor, where is your FedRAMP? Hey, Mr. Vendor, let's sign the DPA. All this stuff is essentially saying, what data are we exchanging? Are we exchanging PII? Where are you going to store the data? All this stuff is happening. There's one critical point to remember over here. As soon as you put this information in your GRC system, it's a point-in-time check. The day after, that information is no longer valid. Why? Let's look at that why. Because the rate at which we are changing functionality in code bases today is 100x of what it was only 5 years ago. If you look at, and this is a statistic where 99.8% of Fortune 5,000 organizations today do not have a real-time, accurate, complete list of data subprocessors. Not because for the lack of trying or anything like that, but because the landscape is changing so quickly. The question is, why is the landscape changing so quickly? Because people like me are going and telling a potential customer, you need that feature, why don't you sign the document? In 90 days, we'll give it to you. And my VP of engineering is sweating, like, oh God, here goes Anirban again. Gotta close the deal, because for a startup and for a business, revenue is the most important thing. You gotta close the deal. So if we are beating the developers on the head with, hey, make sure this feature comes out, and it's well tested, and everything has to be perfect within the next 30 days, do you think the developer is going to take the path of least resistance or something else? All these things that I'm talking about, it's a common sense. There's no revelation going on over here. That's the fortunate and unfortunate part to it. When the developer has to get the thing out within the minimum period of time, they're gonna get third-party services, build the product or the feature set, shove it out, here we go. That's what happened in the world of software today. It's nothing else. What data are they getting? All these APIs that we are communicating over, we think we are exchanging PII. We think we're exchanging PII, IP confidential information, but are we? I mean, even when we go to the airport and you have TSA-3, you walk in, but they do see your ID, don't you? So there's trust but verify in nearly every aspect of life. But do we do trust but verify for data going through APIs? I won't take the name of the organization, but the four-letter organization that does the scores for your credit card worthiness and all that stuff, they use about 17 different services to do background checks for every single individual for whom that's 840 whatever score is generated. When they were, and this is a well-publicized incident in a sense, where 3 years ago when they were talking to these third-party services, there's an API call that goes out that has a social security number and some other parameters for the person for whom the score needs to be generated. In one of those fields, instead of one social security number, 16 social security numbers were slammed in. Nobody knew about it. 48 hours later, Snowflake is calling this company and saying, hey, we love you as a customer. Your bill is going to be $5 billion this year. So, great. They're like, what? Why is the bill going to be that high? Well, you're pushing so much logs into our system. So essentially what was going on is they were passing all this information, 16 social security numbers in place of one social security number. This was creating a cascading effect of error logs happening. Nobody looked at it, nobody knew. All these error logs were being processed in Snowflake. Snowflake was super happy about it. Yeah, keep doing this. So we're going to make money over here. These are things that happen at even the most mature companies with a lot of guardrails in place. So this is a common sense thing to understand that, do you know what's actually going through here? It's not just the type of data, the amount of data, things of this sort. How are we processing this data? Are we doing it in the right way, in a secure way or not? And I'll speak very quickly to this slide. The trend is actually really interesting, but in the last couple of years, even Gartner has been quoting that from a software supply chain perspective, the number of attacks that we see has grown exponentially. Now, we'll go into the type of log4js and SolarWinds and all that, and we'll talk about it, that does it actually make sense? Are people actually doing software supply chain security or something else in the market? This is what sometimes we use to highlight what is above and visible and what is below and usually invisible. When we talk about all these SolarWinds and whatnot, log4j attacks that were there, truth be told, to the best of my knowledge, there is 0 companies, product companies in the software supply chain market that can actually solve the SolarWinds kind of a situation. That's a very brutal statement to make because I am in that market, but it is true. Everybody goes, we'll solve log4j for you, we'll solve log. Basically, what the vendors are saying is, if you've got a budget, I'll solve it for you. So, it's not going to work that way because it's the only thing that really solves SolarWinds type situations is something called SLSA, SALSA, if you've heard of it. It's an unofficial effort led by Google to help people make sure that the code bases that they have, everything in that code base is signed and is trustworthy. This is a huge effort. When I was at Cloudflare, I helped that team set up their root CAs internally. It took us 9 months. And Cloudflare had one of the best technical teams. It took us 9 months to set up a root CA at the scale at which you would work. So to ask a mid-market company, why don't you sign your code base? You're asking them to build a tank and the guy doesn't know how to build a bicycle. It's not going to work out. These are good aspirational things that large companies throw out. It's not easy to do these things. So where is the invisible risk if we try to break this down? On the left-hand side of the screen, you see areas that are relatively well understood. All of us have heard about application security testing, we do website testing, things of that sort. There are many products in the market that do code library analysis, and they say, oh, you're using these building blocks in your code, these are unsafe, these are outdated, all good stuff, everything is good stuff. But the missing part is, and as we all know, the number of alerts is not the problem. How many can I actually act on in a week is the problem, because I have limited IR resources. I don't have infinite IR resources. Which ones should I look at? So ultimately it boils down for the left side of the screen to stack ranking. Which ones should I look at? And how do you stack rank so that it makes sense to your business? Right. So what is a good way to stack rank? What is the state of the art to stack rank today? State of the art is essentially to say what type of operating systems are you using, therefore is the vulnerability applicable to you or not, how much data is it processing, things of that sort. There is one missing aspect over here that the industry is slowly trying to work into it, especially from a tool perspective, which is how much revenue is that particular vulnerability going to affect? This walks back to the question of the product that this vulnerability is affecting, how much revenue does this product bring in? So there are different aspects that the industry is working on to make this stack ranking much more effective and useful. On the right-hand side is where things are a little bit more nebulous. It's not well understood as yet. What third-party APIs are we talking about? Where are you sending this data? What data are you sending? What is the reputation of the vendor? And again, vendor reputation in a sense, you have heard of tools like BitSight, Security Scorecard, BlackKite, that are there that are kind of in that zone of letting you know if a breach has happened on a vendor and all that stuff. But again, those are more on the side of outside in, looking in and saying, we see your SSL certificate is weak, we see your IP address is over here. It's a little bit superficial in terms of what is actually going on. You don't have the visibility inside the vendor. So as an example, let me play out a hypothetical situation. If I'm a company and I have a third-party vendor, what I want to know is if I'm using your product, how much risk am I actually absorbing into my system? For me to understand that, if it's a SolarWinds or whatever it is that I'm using, I need to know what the vulnerabilities are in your code base in real time and how they affect me. That's not yet there. Because this is not a technical issue. This is a business management issue because you're crossing business boundaries to get that information. This is not a technical problem to solve. This is an example of an online banking stack. And I chose that because at this point of time, a lot of people talk about open banking. What is open banking? Open banking is essentially a bunch of functionality built on the backs of APIs. That's it. There's nothing else to it. So if open banking is being used for making all these functionality available to banking customers, and there are different classes of functionality, what you'll observe over here is there are two icons that I put, and I apologize for the branding at the bottom and the top. But the one icon is for third-party vendors, and the second icon is for APIs. You can see that the majority of functionality that is being built for especially banking type, fintech type companies includes both or at least one of those. So not only do you have third parties in the mix, you also are using APIs to talk to these third parties. This is just an example to show that sometimes when people think, we're not using API, we absolutely are not. We have a list of 5 people. We talked to a very, Samuel L. Jackson appears for their ad and asks, what do you have in your wallet? We talked to that company and we asked them, for your website, how many vendors do you think you have? And the general counsel was on the call and the general counsel says, we only have 10. Who are they? Yes, we use a customized version of WordPress. This, we only have 10. Okay, we found 96. And the general counsel on the call is sweating bullets like, oh God, now we know that we are sending data to a heat mapping service, so we know where the customer's mouse is there and we can optimize all these things. We're sending data, heat map data, to a company in Malaysia with the username of the customer. So it's like PII walking out through the door, we don't even know what the heck is going on. And again, this goes back to that point of somebody came to the developer and said, hey, we need to optimize our website, and we need this done by tomorrow. You gotta put in that piece of JavaScript over there, so we know where the mouse of the customer is, and we know where they're clicking and where they're lingering, and we put this one. As they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So that's essentially what happens in a sense. From a risk perspective, we take a very standard banking application for a very small bank, mid-sized bank. One of the first places you find data supply chain come into the picture is when you're accepting or interacting with the customer. Typical example is on a very small banking website, customer will come in, put in the username, password, do something like that. The authentication system that the bank is using is not something that they have written by themselves. They are using either Okta, Fiserv, whatever it is, 10 different options that are there. So from there itself, from the first interaction itself, third parties involved, APIs involved. Great. Now you're on the internal portal, you're clicking buttons, you're generating PDFs of your banking statements, wire transfers, all this stuff that is happening in the background. Every single step of interaction that's happening involves APIs and involves all kinds of third parties. There is an important point to understand over here to that. Are we talking specifically about API security? And I would argue not. Because if you look at the market today, and you just search for API security on Google, you'll find companies that are doing have raised $150 million, $200 million. We do API security, we're going to secure all your APIs, don't worry, come to us, we'll solve it for you. Right? But what are they actually doing? They are more or less penetration testing your APIs between you and your customers. Great. What about the data walking out through the door to third parties? That's also API. Nobody's doing it. That's the problem space that I think is super interesting. When it comes to pure API security, of more or less pen testing your API, that's a good thing to do. You should do it. Our opinion and hypothesis is that it is equally important as testing your website. It is not more important, it is not less important. It is equally as important as you do using Qualys or whatever service you have. That is the website vulnerable to SQL injection or not? Is the website vulnerable to cross-site scripting or not? Same thing for it, you should test for it. But it is not more or less important. The blind spot that we see is essentially, and we as a company also use third parties for our, we want to call a customer or make cold calls. So we use a third party service to kind of dashboard to do that. You see for the third party service, who are your data sub-processors? Oh, we've got this list. Okay, got this list. There's 15 names on it. Okay, how do you update this? We'll get back to you. When do you update this? File the support request, we'll get back to you. It's not that they don't want to tell us, the answer to these things are especially thorny. To give you a little bit of context, so this is my third startup, Riscosity. My first one was called Stop the Hacker, we sold it to Cloudflare. The second one was called Onion ID, we sold it to Thycotic. In both these acquisitions, there was a period during the due diligence, what usually happens. You guys are familiar with this, where the buyer is trying to understand what is the risk that I'm absorbing into my company paying this much money for this thing? What is the risk that tomorrow I'm going to switch it on with my branding? Is it going to explode after that? What's going to happen? Am I going to get hacked because of this thing? To understand that risk, what is the state of the art? And for my first one in 2013, the state of the art was run Nessus scans, make a big Excel sheet of all the third-party services you're using. Okay? In 2018, 2019, the little bit of evolution. Run a Nessus scan, this time run it with more features in Nessus, and again make 3 Excel sheets. One for code, one for this, or that. That is the state of the art at this point of time. There is no easy way to answer questions about how do I quantify this risk? How do I really understand what's the risk? That's the essential problem with this entire API and third-party ecosystem. Because for us, we have to go in, and what did I do? Lowest paid employee on the development team, hey, why don't you go look at 50,000 lines of code? Make this Excel sheet. Oh yeah, he's gonna do a great job. Because the other guys are busy doing functionality, right? Or whatever it is that they need to do. These are manual processes. The largest independent private CASB company, I won't take the name, but everybody will know it. I asked the CISO for that company, how are you solving this problem? People. And there's no easy answer to it, because if you want to get FedRAMP High, FedRAMP Low, any one of these standards, you have to declare who your subprocessors are, you have to declare all these things. It's extremely manual. These are like practical issues that are there. But what is the driving factor behind all this discussion that we're having? Why is it important? Who's asking for it? There are three simple answers to this. These are the three simple reasons why people are interested in solving this problem. Compliance, privacy and legal and security. Usually what you find in the last, and other speakers have talked here today, in the last 2 to 3 years, what we've started observing, and especially after the SolarWinds incident, is that when negotiation happens between a vendor and a large customer, usually there is a set of things that are asked for, vendor disclosures and this and that, but people are now including questions about data subprocessors. 100%, it's going to be there. Who are your data subprocessors? Then we've started seeing, especially from pharma companies, if your customer is a pharma company, they will start asking questions about how is that data processed within the data subprocessor? Who are they giving it to? So it's no longer just third party, it's now fourth party. Who are they giving it to? Which geographical jurisdiction are they storing it in? And imagine how this snowballs into a disaster, because you try to close the deal within the next 30 days. Who is going to get this information in the next 30 days, package it up appropriately, answer all the questions, move the ball forward? It's extremely thorny to get this thing done. From a privacy and legal perspective, GDPR and all these things are there. Even though GDPR, we talk about 10% of revenue can be the hit and this and that. There's not that many examples where people have been hit with GDPR fines left and right. But people are interested. Here's a very typical example. There is a product, again, I won't take the name of this, but it does things which makes life easy from a defarce processing perspective for GDPR. So if somebody says, hey, I'm not happy with your company, please remove all my information from your company. That's essentially what the right to be forgotten thing happens. So this product, which is the state of the art, again, in the market, what it does is the following. Somebody comes and fills out a form saying, hey, please remove my information. So if I do that, it says, okay, here is the list of vendors that we have. It starts sending emails to admin @ legal @ privacy @ Google. Remove Anirban's information, please. So what this thing just did is, it potentially gave Anirban's information to a third party that might not have had Anirban's information in the first place to remove Anirban's information. This is the level of the state of the art. That's what's going on. These are like practical issues that companies are struggling with. How do we automate this in a better way? So from a privacy angle, there is a need to solve this problem. From a security, obviously, data leak protection and all these things that are there. And the question comes, if data leak protection is the whole thing, and Netscope does this, Zscaler does this, McAfee Sky does it, everybody does DLP under the sun, why can't they solve it? Very simple answer. Most DLP software, two reasons actually, most DLP software sits on the edge. Unless you have the capability to slip in a certificate in the actual HTTPS stream, you won't be able to read what the encrypted traffic is going on. You'll get some collected statistics about this much data and all that stuff, but you won't know what's actually going on through there. And the reason why the CASB companies cannot slip in a certificate for APIs is not a technical issue. Again, it's a business issue, because most CASBs today, they will tell a customer, hey, we have support for Dropbox, we have support for this, we have support for that.
50 applications. In order to support these 50 applications, you need to have business relationships with each one of these applications because you're going to slip in a certificate over there, the browser will complain. You can have business relationships with 50, 60, 100 companies. You can't have business relationships with 50,000 random companies out there. Why is that important? Because guess what? Even in software development, let's say you want to do something super simple. I want to take an IP address and find out geolocation of this IP address. There's 88 popular web services out there right now on the internet with an API call. You think you'll be able to track down the guy who wrote the 87th one and have a business relationship with them to insert your certificate in the API chain? It's not going to work. But these are practical issues like this is still a live problem. What's a successful strategy? Let's get to that part. We agree, there's a problem. Great. One of the things that we can focus on and what we have seen in the market where people are moving towards is something super basic but effective. One is API governance, third-party API governance. Do you have a catalog? Do you know who you are talking to? What data is going through? A new term, a relatively new term called Software Bill of Materials, SBOM, that has been pushed by the executive order by the Biden administration. SBOM is essentially, the way I describe it is for folks who haven't heard the term before, when you go buy a bottle of hot sauce, in the market, and you turn it around, you see the label saying this much carbohydrate, this much protein, this many sugars, blah, 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 blah. Breakdown of what's in this bottle. Exactly same thing for software. Next one is data geotracking. Where is the data actually going? And finally, vendor reputation. This is a strategy that if these 4 minimum things are there to handle that you can attach to what your data is doing, you'll be successful. From a program breakdown perspective, this is a little more detail. That fine, you have these 4 areas that you're focusing on, but in a little more detail, if you talk to your team and we say, hey, can we do these things? Yes or no? These are much more bite-sized chunks of functionality that they can implement and that will help you in this data supply chain governance program. One of the things that I would say we have seen as again, not to take names, but a very large Realtor.com type company, when you look at their code base, what you find is essentially that there's an API call going to a website in China that's accepting payment information. And the CISO calls me and says, what the heck is going on? And we found out in conversations that this API call was put in testing. Somebody forgot that, hey, we're going to test with that endpoint and we have to take it out. So it's not always just because of, malicious intent or, some design that somebody has. Mistakes happen. These things get left in. So this is a way to just even catch, misconfigurations that have just existed in code bases. Let's talk a little bit about things like Log4j, right? So, as other presenters have talked about Log4j, SolarWinds and all that stuff, one of the examples of, one of the interesting parts of this entire thing, and you might have seen a couple of days ago, OpenSSL, new vulnerability, the world is falling apart, it's the new hot thing, and every software security company is saying, gotta watch out, the patch is coming, the patch is coming. The thing is, with any of these data supply chain issues, it is a given that we will have these incidents. It is a given that you will use third-party software. It is a given that you will have open source components in your software. That's not new. There will be something else. The whole point is, again, does that really affect your data or not? What we have found in talking to CISOs and CIOs, and before I say this, can somebody take a guess at this blank is the new oil? What should go in the blank?
Data.
The CISOs are way more concerned about data and how that interacts with all of this versus the actual security vulnerability. Why? Because at the end of the day, from a regulatory perspective, if you get a fine, what do you actually get fined for? Do you get fined for getting hacked? Or do you get fined for losing customer data? Which one do you really get fined for from a regulation perspective? It's the latter. If you look at the Equifax breach itself, and you read through the documents that were there, Equifax didn't get, slapped on the wrist because they got hacked. Equifax got slapped on the wrist because they lost customer data. That's the real issue. Where is the data going? What data is going out of the door? That's the whole problem that I see. I know that people are getting hungry, so I will wrap it up very quickly. We got to sell this thing internally. No matter what type of program that you have. Again, I apologize. I should have taken up the Riscosity word over there, but again,
It's fine.
no matter what type of program you have, no matter how good is it for the company and all that stuff, we have to sell these programs internally. There has to be a use case as to why this is beneficial for the business. And the good news is, there are some over here. If anybody wants the slides, you want to use it, Samantha has it, please contact Catalyst, and you can use the slides, do whatever you like with it. These are not our sales slides or anything like that, so it's perfectly fine. One of the interesting things that we have seen is after the SolarWinds hack, boards are now way more interested in finding out the answer to the question, are we going to get hit? If this happens to us, what's going to happen? So people are asking these questions. Therefore, at this point of time, in a lot of companies, there is visibility and support for these types of projects that are there. So, with these types of solutions that you can build yourselves, or you can work with Catalyst, this can also help for impactful board reporting, because guess what? At the end of the day, the C-level is trying to make the decision that how am I reducing risk and increasing risk. That's it. There's no amazing action going on in terms of cranial processes over there. It's like, we need more money, and are we going to get hacked? Those two questions need to be answered. These things will help you answer those questions, put the right foot forward, and all that. With that, any questions, comments? I mean, as Jesse said, that the last speaker is usually safe to be either the best or the worst. So I hope for this one. And if there are any questions, please go for it. Be happy to answer. This was either very good or very bad.